Welcome to News for Scotland with this week's Scottish news headlines Anglo-British mainstream media don't want you to hear. Here are this week's top stories. The SNP's one-day campaign conference in Edinburgh on Saturday passed a motion calling on the UK government to prepare for Scotland's exit from the Union. The motion, tabled by the Glasgow Southside Constituency Association, was passed unanimously after a bid to withdraw it failed. SNP member Alex Orr, who seconded the motion, said, "The reality is not that Scotland cannot afford to be independent, it is that the UK government cannot afford to be unprepared. The idea projected is that Scotland is a subsidy junkie, a passenger in a union that generously keeps our lights on. If Scotland achieves independence, that pillar will be removed," Orr told delegates at Edinburgh's International Conference Centre on Saturday. But, speaking on the same day at the Joint Independence Forum, Scotland Yes United conference at Glasgow's Oran Mor, veteran campaigner and former SNP MP Jim Sillars accused the SNP of using the independence cause to get re-elected, rather than any serious attempt to win back Scotland's statehood. Sillars said the 2029 UK general election would allow the independence movement time to prepare a campaign to persuade the people of Scotland that independence should be supported, saying the SNP had done nothing to win over the Scottish public to the cause since the 2014 referendum. The independence movement has had more than 10 wasted years because the SNP has done nothing since the 2014 referendum to drive support for independence, a conference in Glasgow was told. The event, organised by Independence Forum Scotland and Yes United, was held at Glasgow's iconic venue, Oran Mor, with speakers including Jim Sillars, Lesley Riddoch and Phil Boswell. More than 100 people gathered to discuss how an independent Scotland would approach energy and economic policy, and its relationship with Europe, and was billed as a chance to get the band back together ahead of May's elections, with an evening of entertainment following the day's conference session. Sillars criticised the SNP for 10 wasted years, and for failing to carry out a post-mortem on the 2014 result to see what lessons could be learned. The conference sessions were styled in a World Cafe format, with groups moving between the different discussion areas. A keynote speech from Lesley Riddoch focused on what Scotland can learn from Scandinavian countries, with each offering inspiration for how Scotland could reorganise itself after independence. Finland's 20th century land reforms, for example, were promoted as a path to cooperative ownership, away from the hands of corporations, institutions and the monarchy, while Sweden's modern taxation system that has local authorities, not national government, at its core could be used to reconstruct how services are provided across Scotland, she said. Watch our News for Scotland special on the conference, which is available to watch straight after this programme. We will also be showing the evening's entertainment in a separate show featuring musicians including Eddie Reader, John Douglas, Bobby Bluebell, the Countess of Fife, Mellow Party and Soliday. Hit that notification bell now to be notified of all new releases from the Scotland channel, and please like and share our content, as this will help boost our YouTube algorithms and make our content available to more viewers. A founding member of Alliance to Liberate Scotland, Alan Petrie, has quit the party following the selection of Craig Murray as a candidate in the Edinburgh Central seat, currently held by the SNP's Angus Robertson. Petrie, who was featured in the recent Scotland Channel documentary People Power, and was to be the party's candidate for Dundee City East, said Murray's move from the now-defunct Alapa party had meant that Alliance to Liberate Scotland had become the same old party politics we set out to challenge. In a statement posted on X, Petrie said, "The recent selection of Craig Murray as a candidate has forced me to confront a reality that many of us had hoped would never arise. Murray has spent years moving between political parties and platforms in pursuit of a parliamentary seat. The Alliance was meant to stand firmly against that culture. The Alliance to Liberate Scotland, a coalition of Independence for Independence, the Independence for Scotland Party and Sovereignty formed last year, describe themselves as a single-issue party where none of their candidates want to become career politicians, instead seeking election for one term only, to ensure the SNP deliver independence in the event they don't secure a majority in May's elections. While other parties have become mired in vanity projects and distractions, we focus on what truly matters: independence," the party said. Petrie claimed he had been stabbed in the back by his former comrades because of Murray's selection. It's understood that another former Alapa member, Tommy Sheridan, has also joined the Alliance to Liberate Scotland following Alapa's collapse. Petrie added, "Even more troubling is that members who helped build the party from nothing now appear to be pushed aside, while those with long histories of party hopping and political opportunism are welcomed with open arms and even given preference. That is not what we promised the people of Scotland. It is not the movement many of us worked so hard to create, he said. Reform UK's vote share has fallen 6 percentage points over the past 6 months, the latest Ipsos Westminster voting intention poll shows. Nigel Farage's party is now on 28% from 24% in September. A YouGov poll showed Reform attracting just 23% in Westminster voting intention, a mere 2 points ahead of the Greens. Scottish pollster Mark Diffley said this was always going to happen as Reform were only ever going to be able to attract a certain portion of voters, with the majority of the population telling researchers they would never consider voting for them. He added that Reform are now under more scrutiny given they now control some English local authorities, while the public no longer believe immigration is a leading issue in the UK as reasons for their fall in popularity. The Ipsos poll, meanwhile, showed Green Party support has gone up 5 points to 17%. Ultimately, Reform retained a 7-point lead over Labour in second on 21% in the poll, but the survey showed 58% said they are dissatisfied with Farage as a leader, up 3 points since January. Claims that drilling in the North Sea will significantly cut household energy bills are sheer fantasy, according to experts at the University of Oxford. A report by the university showed a UK fully powered by renewable energy, with electricity coming from clean sources and people using technology such as electric heat pumps for their home heating, could save households up to £441 a year on bills. By contrast, maximising oil and gas extraction from the North Sea would save households between £16 to £82 a year, and that saving would only be delivered if the tax revenues collected from fossil fuel companies were redistributed to families to offset their energy bills. The university concluded that if the English UK government did not use the tax revenues it collects from North Sea drilling solely to help lower household bills, there would be no discernible benefit to consumers at all, as oil and gas prices are set by volatile international markets. Scotland already leads the way, as it is already able to power all its homes and businesses from renewable energy. However, energy policy is left in the hands of the government in London, which has resulted in Scots paying among the highest energy prices in the world, and higher than consumers in London. The English government also wants to force toxic nuclear energy on Scotland against the wishes of the Scottish government, which has used planning laws to prevent new nuclear power stations from being built north of the border. The main reason is that English ministers have been lobbied by the nuclear industry with large donations made to various English politicians to ensure nuclear forms part of the so-called UK's energy strategy. Scotland's Uncensored news show, News for Scotland on the Scotland Channel, is changing from a weekly news show to a regular news alert service. Instead of the weekly Friday night show, News for Scotland will produce news alerts on specific stories throughout the week, in the form of news shorts. Research shows that traditional news shows do not attract viewers to the same degree that news shorts do, and producing a weekly news show just hasn't been sustainable for the channel with the viewing numbers we've attracted to date, said Scotland Channel founder Peter Giel. We hope more regular short news alerts will prove more popular as they give a short 60-second briefing on Scotland's top stories, which Anglo-British media simply doesn't cover. Hit the notification bell now to ensure you don't miss out on any of our news alerts as they are released, and please also hit the subscribe button. It's free to do and helps us to reach bigger audiences. Scotland is poorly served by mainstream English television. We are undertaking work to improve our reach to give Scotland a voice in our current English UK television landscape. Please help us by making a contribution to our crowdfunder appeal, and together we can make sure Scotland is properly represented on our television screens. Thank you to everyone who has supported us so far.
Hello, today the Scotland Channel is in the Oran Mor, Glasgow for a spring conference put together by the Independence Forum Scotland and Yes United. What's it all about? Statecraft. When Scotland's an independent country, how will it organise things like its foreign affairs? How will it deal with energy policy? Will it be part of the European Union? Will it join EFTA? Questions like that are being discussed by small groups. People are just getting around the tables and one group leader is putting the main questions to them. And then later on, the whole conference is just going to listen to what everybody in the group has decided. So that's all happening here in the beautiful Oran Mor. And if you're upstairs here, you can see the paintings done by Alistair Gray, the Glasgow painter and author who we lost a few years ago. But his work is still in this amazing hall here. So let's go and hear some of the speeches and some of the conference today at the Oran Mor.
One thing is for absolutely sure, from today's proceedings. This movement is not ready to win an independence vote because we've had 10 wasted fairy tale years in which no real work has been done. Now, I'm hoping that events here today and this evening may prove historic. If that proves to be so, and it leads to a manifesto for independence, I think it would be useful for the movement to learn lessons from the other historical event, the 2014 referendum, when we failed, and how the white paper of 2014, which was the 2014 manifesto, that lay at the heart of that failure, was compiled, and by whom, so that we don't make the same mistake with the manifesto we will require to win independence in 3 years' time. It's very strange, but you know, there's never been a formal or even informal post-mortem on why we lost. That's quite remarkable. If you're running an amateur football team and you lose, the next day you sit and talk what you haven't done right. It's never happened on the biggest issue that faced Scotland over 300 years. Now, whereas today's meeting has involved lots of people, lots of opinion, discussions, questions and answers, the 2014 white paper was the product of a very small group around Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon. It was written in civil service prose by civil servants. It promoted independence as sort of change, no change, just a bit of change in the economy and social policy. And if you actually read it, because I reread it before I came here, and it's sitting down on the table there, it was defensive. It sought to reassure people, don't worry, there's nothing going to happen. There's no risks involved in independence, and it did not inspire. Whereas today's meeting, I think, has set the foundation for a better manifesto. The key proposal, and this is important, the key proposal in that document was the currency union between a Scottish state and an English state. And it was the product of a specialist, very eminent committee on financial affairs. And its proposition fell within seconds of its publication because it failed the political test. If you want a currency union between two states, both of them have got to agree. And if one of them doesn't, it doesn't happen. Now, there's a very important lesson to be learned from that. Experts are valuable, and expert opinion is essential. But experts don't stand for election. They've no experience of standing on a platform with opponents who are going to do you down. So you've always got to take the expert's opinion and apply a political test as to whether it'll go with the public or not. And that's the most important lessons we can learn from 2014. Let us welcome expert opinion. Let us value what they've got to tell us, but put it through the political test before it's committed to black and white in an independence manifesto. Now, such a manifesto has to do two things: address directly and with concrete priority solutions to what ails our people in Scotland today. I want to be able, if I'm old enough and live long enough, to be able to go into the housing schemes and tell folk there, I have a manifesto which, if implemented by your vote for independence, I can transform your way of life in terms of prosperity. And that manifesto has to have something better even than the concrete solutions. It has to be expressed in language that will inspire in the Scots a liberating self-confidence in what they can achieve together. Once we are free from the debilitating devolution within the Union. I didn't vote for the Parliament in Holyrood. I read the white paper that was published. And once I read it, I told Margot, I can't vote for this. There is not enough power. Not only that, they'll be able to spin this out for 20 to 25 years with a wee bit here and a wee bit there. And what devolution has done to the Scottish political mind, it's narrowed it. How many times do we discuss foreign policy? How many times do we discuss defence policy? We don't. It's hospitals, roads, ferries, all very important. But these are not the issues that simply occupy a genuine, independent polity. Devolution is something we have got to tell the Scottish people will not work and will never work for us. And remember Enoch Powell's dictum, devolution is power retained at Westminster. Now, I doubt, and I may upset some people in this audience today, I doubt if such a manifesto will emerge from the other meeting taking place in Edinburgh today. Because the word independence that will be used there is an abstraction. It's like the fisherman's lure into the river to catch a salmon. It's a political fisherman's lure dipped into the stream of public opinion, looking for votes that can translate into seats, even if it's a minority government. That's what's happening in Edinburgh, as distinct from what's happening here, where we're trying to hammer out something of substance. The May election is the prime concern of the other meeting that's happening today. I don't believe 2026 is going to be decisive. We'll be lucky if we get a 55% poll. And how the hell you claim a mandate on a 55% poll where you only get 35% of it is well beyond me. 2029 is the decisive election for Scottish independence. First past the post is to our advantage. And if we build the independence vote, we cannot be beaten first past the post in 2029. What I want to do, and what I'd like the movement to do as we proceed to campaign, is say to the Scottish people, let us contrast the position in 2026, 27, 28, 29 with 2014. No unionist now can advance the 2014 Better Together project fear that Scotland, to survive, must cuddle into the arms of the economically powerful England disguised as the UK. Our partner on this island, far from being a global power, is in precipitous decline. Its institutions are crumbling. Doesn't matter which one you look at, they're all in crises. It's broken, broke, stuck in a deep trench of debt. It's got a government living in daily terror of the international bond market. A poor country that can no longer pretend to be rich and powerful. There are umpteen signs if the Scots will open their eyes to England's decline. At the very top level, between 2010 and 2025, there have been 7 prime ministers, every one a failure. We used to say that about Italy. Now you can say that about England. At the other end of the scale, there's a telling saga of HMS Dragon, whose inability to sail timorously gave the world the impression that Britain had a one-ship navy, while Macron could sell an aircraft carrier and 9 frigates in a couple of days. Far from being admired, south of the border is a world laughingstock. Now, there is a new case for independence, because the case from 2014, when we were defeated by people telling us, we've got to be under the umbrella of the powerful UK. That no longer applies. We've looked at Scotland today. We've got to get the Scottish people to look at England in an entirely different way than they've ever looked at England before. The new case for optimism is what we should be putting to the Scottish people. And that's based on not simply what we can do, but what we can't do as long as we are attached to a state that's in decline, decay, and is a failure at home and on the international stage. But this movement, if we're going to have a new case, well, that's external. That's us talking to the folk. When it comes to talking to ourselves, we've some real hard decisions to make. So far, with the exception really of Alba, which has now failed, we have accepted the claim of one vehicle. The claim that they and they alone can deliver independence. I think the final test of that is in May. And if they don't pass that test, then I think this movement will have some very, very hard decisions to make. May, I think, will probably turn out to be one of the inflection points of history, where the hand of history makes redundant what is present and something new has to emerge. And we may have to follow the words of Abraham Lincoln at an inflection point in his country's history and think anew and act anew on which vehicle we choose to carry the manifesto for independence. Now, I want to close because I think we have to put before the Scottish people not just a manifesto, but a manifesto for a purpose. Right now, Scotland is sharing that decline I've described about what's happening to our partners south of the border, because our economy is linked to it. In fact, I would actually argue from a personal point of view, I don't think there is a Scottish economy. We are an appendage of the economy from south of the border. That's debatable. But we are in the same state of decline. And this union carries costs. 25% of our young, according to a survey done last month, 25% of young Scots believe they have no future. You know, this should be the springtime of their lives, when they're bouncing with all the energy and ambition, when they look at the world as my generation and yours did when we were young, thinking there's nothing we can't take on and there's nothing we can't change. 25% of them think that's hopeless. Absolutely hopeless. We've got 20% of our young people living in poverty, and among them 80,000 living in abject poverty. Thousands of families have no home. Food banks, which were inconceivable 25 years ago, are now an informal but integral part of our social security system. People today in Scotland, in this union, cannot afford to put food on the table. Now, I'm a child of the war. During the war, U-boats were sinking ships in the Atlantic. Nobody anywhere in the British Isles could not put food on the table. The purpose of independence must be to wipe that Scotland off the map and replace it. Wipe it off the map and replace it with a nation where the norm is security of income, food on all tables, a roof over every family's head, and well-educated young people with a future in their own nation. All of which is possible in a Scotland that is endowed with enough land and abundance of energy to take us from where we are today to a far, far better future where all of our people are prosperous. Now, if I may, and crave your indulgence, I would like to make a personal statement and a request to those in this audience and those it represents. I've been in politics 66 years. All of that time, I've been influenced by many men and many women, Margot being one of them. But by three in particular. Bertrand Russell taught me to think critically. Nye Bevan anchored me in democratic socialism. And Nehru of India, who in his great speech on the midnight hour of Indian independence set for me and all humankind an ambition that is impossible to achieve, but one which must be pursued and can be partially accomplished. Let me quote Naro on that historic evening. The ambition of the greatest men of our generation has been to wipe every tear from every eye. That may be beyond us, but so long as there are tears and suffering, so long our work will not be over. That challenge to improve the lot of the people has been at the centre of my life through 66 years. And during the almost half a century, along with others, now unknown and forgotten about, who have worked for Scottish independence. I'd like to say a word or two for our generation. The times were never right for us to deliver independence. Labour at one time were far too strong. We, however, had our great moments, but mostly we got gubbed. And we got back up and we got gubbed again. And we got back up and we got gubbed again and had the stamina to get back up once more. Our task was to keep the idea alive. That is the story of my generation in the independence movement. I am now 88 years old. The 2029 election is 3 years away, and the arithmetic talks for itself. So, like others of my generation, my usefulness, and I say this not in any emotional way whatsoever, but just objectively, people of my generation and myself now have a limited usefulness for this movement. So I have a request to make to those of the younger generations with still so much to give. I want you to deliver the power of sovereignty, not just because we would have it at last. I want you to use that sovereignty to bring forth a Scottish society that has the mark and character of exceptional decency. One which we may not be able to do what Nehru said, to wipe every tear from every eye. But in this Scotland today, there are tears of anger, there are tears of sorrow, and there are tears of humiliation. The task I want you to use sovereignty for is to make sure that no unnecessary tear ever again falls down any Scottish cheek.
You don't almost need to know all of this. And I've got, you know it already. Look, the happiest country is Finland. Now, is anybody Finnish in the room? Half Finnish? The Finns are not a cheery lot, you've got to say. I mean, they'd be the first to say to you, they're not laughing out loud. They're satisfied and they have the highest levels of trust in the world. Now, trust matters. They also, those countries that are shown there in yellow, the strong yellow, those are the top 10 countries for income equality. And you'll see Finland's there and we're not. So that makes a massive difference to everything you try to do, obviously. This question of trust, if you've seen the Finland film, if you haven't, there's wee leaflets on that table at the back that just gives you the website. There's still about another 10, 12 events to go. But the Finns have got some of the highest levels of trust in the world. And that makes all sorts of things possible. So for example, education. You may know they have the best education system pretty much, results-wise. How do they do it? Generally speaking, is because schools run themselves. There's nobody looking over people's shoulders. There's no 10 hours a week filling in paperwork. There's no having to prove yourself to professionals who aren't in the room. All these aspects of the way we work in Scotland are wrong, wrong, wrong. They radiate a lack of trust. They radiate that professionals basically don't trust the average Joe and Josephine at all. And actually, that infects you with doubt when you realise how little you're being trusted to do stuff. And that's just one aspect of this. But that trust is born by putting power right to the lowest level in our society, and we are not doing it. Of course, the other thing about the Nordics is they're also bloody healthy. So, you know when you're looking at a profile of those guys, it's not us, is it? And yet, they didn't get there, their genes have helped a bit, but they've got there by planning and very, very long-term stuff. And the reason they've got long-term planning, it's proportional governments. So let me give you an example. Denmark, in fact, it's a pretty topical one given the oil crisis we're in today. But in the last oil crisis, and I think a lot of us are old enough to remember it, the 1970s, we're the generation that keeps shutting the doors and switching the lights off. It marked us. Anyway, the 1970s, Denmark realised, like many countries, that it didn't have enough energy of its own. And it decided it would never be stuck depending on anyone else again. And that's the moment when all the parties in that parliament decided they would switch to renewables, way ahead of everyone else. They would keep the price of petrol high, oil high. They would make the importation of cars almost impossibly high. And they've never gone back on that. Now, that's the reason they switched to wind. That's the reason Vestas, a Danish company, produce a third of the turbines in the world. That should have been us. Because we have a far, far better take from wind than Denmark, absolutely. But they had the political collateral, if you like, to decide to move ahead with it. And that was 1974. As many of you will also know, that was a long time ago now. There have been 30 changes of government. There has been no change of policy. Why? Because that coalition or that joint way of working means that when there's a change in the constellation of parties in government, they don't welsh on the deals they've made. That's how you do long term. And that's how you don't do long term here, especially Westminster, which is just a blooming boomerang or a pendulum, because first past the post is ridiculous. But you need to know why you want change, and this is why you want change. You want long-term planning to change things. You're not saying that. By contrast, the Scots feel like we're just kind of constantly blown along, heavy, high winds, trampolines, ducks to the beach, and it feels like we're just not as glamorous somehow as these kind of Nordic folk. And actually, there was a stage when, you'll remember maybe, that Alex Salmond talked about the Ark of Prosperity. Anyone remember that? And I can remember going in and speaking to Alex about that. He was coined it in 2007. Of course, in 2008, Iceland and Ireland conveniently went almost bankrupt, which made the Ark of Prosperity look a little bit soggy. And Jim Murphy, do you remember him? Jim Murphy started talking about the Ark of Insolvency, cheeky monkey. But the point was, I went in to speak to Alec about it, and I was trying to say to him, from my little understanding of it then, and more now, these countries, this is not an ark of prosperity, it's an ark of resilience. And resilience is more important. Because prosperity can come and go, but resilience will let you spring back from just about anything. And that's what we should be aiming at. Not the blind pursuit of prosperity in itself, fine, somebody else can do that. But actually building the kind of resilience that a society needs. If you look at Finland, for example, unbelievable that they could spring back from a civil war like they had. Unbelievable that they could actually spring back from a Second World War where they ended up having to pay reparations to Russia, and out of that became the shipbuilding kings they are today, because they had to build fast, because 500 vessels had to be given to the Russians. Weird, eh? That such an adversity created such a capacity. So it's resilience we should be aiming for, and I did say that to Alec, and he didn't agree, let's just say. So I think the feeling for a lot of people when I find I'm talking about the Nordic countries, there's a bit of a plea, and I've got to say, it was slightly made today, is can we not just aim a bit lower? Please? No? No? because this is where we should be aiming. Now, it's going to take us a bit of time, but I have a couple of thoughts about this. As somebody who, back in the day, used to tan up enough Monroes, you need to get the sense that you're seeing the summit. Even if it's a false summit, you still need to get yourself orientated towards the top. We should be facing the direction we mean to travel in. We also need to believe and understand that we're not crap. We're not personally crap. Now, this might sound weird, coming from that Caithness family and having been involved with many buyouts and so on. I've seen people who won't say it openly, but deeply believe they are crap. That this is the reason things don't progress. That this is why they're stuck. Even that this is why they can't aspire to Nordic sort of standards, because somewhere in the Scottish psyche or whatever it is, we simply cannot hope to make 2 and 2 equals 4. You can't hope that with the level of resources we've got, we could end up with a society that would match their outcomes. Hey folks, 2 and 2 does equal 4, everywhere, right? And there is no reason not to think that the kind of objectives that a country has, which controls its energy in particular, that those should not be ours. The energy revolutions and the democratic independence revolutions have always gone hand in hand. And that's why today's tilt towards energy is so important. Let's look at Iceland. There's this question of local control and this question of energy. I've kind of been making wee films for a while because this is so interesting. Who's been to Iceland? Okay, who's alive in the room, for crying in a bucket? Come on. Right, who's been to Iceland? Is that it? What are you doing, the rest of you? You said go north instead of going south for your holidays once. Well, these guys are pretty inspiring, because if you've gone to Iceland, especially if you've gone in the winter, you will experience being warmer than you've ever been in your life, indoors, right? Because these guys have got geothermal heating, and it means that they've got some of the cheapest energy in Northern Europe, despite being subarctic. It's quite a stunner when you actually turn up and realise you're having to open windows in January just to be able to sleep. But that is the size of it, because their energy is so cheap. Now, when you look at geothermal energy, how did they actually do that? Well, the answer is, for the main part, this power station, Hellisheidar, was invested in by 5 local councils in Iceland. And that was just before the point where they became bankrupt. So let me just hit you with this, right? Iceland, population 355,000, invested in its own geothermal energy, producing heating bills of £20 a month in winter for a small flat. Nobody else invested in that, it was them. So it's just to try and get a measure of what we should be able to expect. Come on. Finland, land reform. Oh, if only I had another hour. But anyway, people might think we missed the boat. It's ancient history, really. It makes no difference. And this is so wrong. Finland's success as a country is very largely based on land reform, which happened in 1918, actually after their civil war. And what it meant was that tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Finns got to own pockets of land. Who's been to Finland? Because that is strange, actually. There's usually far more people who've been to Iceland, but anyway. Finland is an enormous forest. If you own land, you own forest. And so what happened in the last century, the Finns produced pretty much all the wood pulp to supply the burgeoning European newspaper industry. So practically, and then the last event I was at, somebody shouted, and toilet paper. And toilet paper as well. So anything papery, basically, the Finns produced it. And the point was, when that industry took off, it wasn't just the Duke of Buccleuch who benefited with a few bob for his factor, it was all the boats that rose together, all the people who owned land, and that was all the Finns. And how did they do it, just by the by? They organised in massive cooperatives. So Metsalito Cooperative, for example, 500,000 members. And think about that. Because you might think, geez, how do we manage to get cooperatives organised enough to be able to do anything? These guys supplied the entire European newspaper industry for all that length of time, for a century, with 500,000 members and more. So that's how this can work, and that's why it matters. That was the revolution for Finland, because that wealth percolated across the country evenly, and that equality of income because of the land made such a difference to the country. It also is hyper-local. I hope this here will be showing which are the most locally democratic countries in Europe. Now you'll see that Finland is a deep blue and we are kind of red. And this is because that's telling you where the power is. The key thing of all the Nordic countries is power is local. So Finland, for example, has 310 local councils, plus 20 or 30 regionals. So it's got about 340 councils. We've got 32. Now I go back to my earlier point. What does that say to us? It says we could organise a piss-up in a brewery. That is what the professionals, the politicians and the parties think of us. And that is so... And what I've discovered is when you look at the countries that went for independence, all of them, Norway, Finland, Iceland, they all did actually have referendums, but they all had 92 to 98% support. And the reason, I think, was they were already independent up here, and they were practicing independence every week by running everything themselves at local level. They were modelling activity, they were modelling decision-making, they were modelling independence. And I'm afraid what's happening here is that we're modelling the opposite. And we've got a head already, sir. Can we, sir, can you take a wee seat there, eh? We're modelling passivity. I mean, how many people here are a councillor? Not a community councillor, a councillor. Right. Shocking. Just take that in. How many people here run a cooperative? Actually, I'm enjoying this. How many people have got a boat? Look at us. We've got 2 people with a boat, and we've got a coastline, which, if it was laid around the Earth, would go a third of the way around the planet. There's so much wrong with this, folks, and we must be tackling that now. Because otherwise we keep talking, we don't do. We need to do. Because you get confidence through doing. The people that persuaded me of that were Egg. I was a trustee of the Isle of Egg buyout, and those people changed completely. From having no confidence in themselves to actually using just their own good ideas to put that island really back on its feet, and doing has changed them completely. We need to do. More about local ideas. There'll be a lot about tax. In Sweden, everybody here, pretty much I guess, who is a kind of average taxpayer, would pay their entire tax to their local council. In Sweden, Stockholm, the central government is funded by corporation tax and high rate taxpayers only. Everybody else just pays their income tax to their council. And you might think, gosh, that's a bit weird. I said that once when I was in Sweden. And they said, really? How do you do it? And I thought, dear. Yeah, we pay everything centrally to Westminster. We pay something back to Holyrood, and then Holyrood pays something back to councils, with all those administrative fees and everything taken off. And actually, your services are delivered locally. So if we want to get rid of the British mindset, to me it could only be typified strongly by being absolutely top-down, absolutely elitist, and absolutely convinced that if the little people had their hands on the money, they'd make a right hips of it. So it's worth thinking about. Swedes do pretty well. They also have 92 local energy companies, which are mostly the councils. So all of that muscle is happening there. And just by the by, Swedish local elections have a turnout of 92%. I wonder why. Do you think it's because they've got your money? Do you think that's another reason that council turnouts are pretty low here? You could change that. We've got to change that. And there's all the local energy companies there. Well, it's not all of them, because there's so many of them, but they are those councils, which makes a big difference. And just to bang the drum, since there's so many here that share this particular preoccupation, they do district heating. Now, why the hell we are not doing that now beats me. If you don't know what that is, and my God, what a situation. The whole of Northern Europe is basically functioning because of district heating. That is one boiler or power system, many pipes of hot water. That is what's made these Nordic countries, a third of whose territory sits in the Arctic. That's what's made them habitable. It's the reason no old people die of hypothermia, they do here. And it's efficient. If you want to change your system to something more green, there's one change. How many changes in this room to reach you? You're all going to have to pay more for individual systems. This is a curse of Thatcherism, the belief that heating, something as prime as that, should be left to an individual when the whole of Northern Europe delivers it as a collective good. Now, how much of a spring in your step do you think you would have if every town in Scotland had one street at least to start off with, converted to district heating with a great big slogan, collective heating brought to you by the Scottish Government? And actually, the Scottish Government has 100% control of heating. Not energy, but heating. So come on. Norway. Well, there's another big important point about land, because actually that very democratic parliament arose from a constitution which gave the vote to every man, because it was those kind of days, who owned land in 1814. And so many men owned land in Norway, because that's normal. We're not. They're normal. That 42% of guys got the vote overnight in 1814. That transformed their society, because their parliament was always ultra-democratic. The same line applied in the Reform Act of 1832 in Britain, which gave the vote to all men over 25 who owned land, and 5% got the vote. And in Scotland, 2.8%. 42%, 3%. That's the difference that happened, because the ability to vote was always related to the ownership of land. So that's the head start the Norwegians have had on us, and because of that really grounded democracy, they've been able to do a lot of things we haven't, particularly advanced hydroelectric. That hydropower, everybody ogles the oil fund, but the Norwegians don't use their oil. It's a hydroelectric country. It's hydro that revolutionised them, and once again, hydropower is owned by local councils. It's not owned by the state. They export oil, and right now, with the oil crisis we've got again, they're laughing, because they're exporting oil to suckers like us, who didn't get going on the resorts we've got. And that was because we couldn't. So, that all lies ahead of us. But if we're not going to think we're aiming for something like this, I don't know why we would think we want to be independent. We've got to. This is the kind of change we need to have. Denmark. And cooperation. Everybody says, yeah, it's good to be cooperative, and actually the Scots have got a bit of a, I would say a bit of a natural tilt that way. In fact, since we're standing in Alston Gray's building, he wrote a fantastic book, Why the Scots Should Rule Scotland, in 1997. It's a tiny wee thin thing, actually. And his main thinking was that the Scots have had to become cooperative because our land is crap. Particularly in Highland areas, we had to work together. His thesis then is that many parts of England where the land is not crap, basically became very defensive because they had a different experience. And that's the book. It's a really interesting one. But this question of cooperation, it doesn't just come out of the ether, you build it. So the amazing thing that the Danes do is they have a system at the age of 15, where 15-year-olds, most of them, get to go away from school, from home for a year. They study with other 15-year-olds, they live with them, they cook with them, they take care of one another, and they study something extra that they really love. So the one that's in the Denmark film is on an island called Samso, and it's a diving school. Can you imagine being sent away from home at the age of 15 to spend a year learning to dive? And everything else as well. Everyone we interviewed in that film said it's the single most important thing about Denmark. Because the kids come back as responsible adults pretty much, but they've had fun. And so everything about cooperation is encouraging people. You have to get the structures in that encourage people to feel cooperative and grounded. There's an awful lot in Scotland where we were telt. We were all telt. And so we assume that that kind of directive will just tell you what to do and you'll do it. Now, smart countries, the Finns as well, they encourage. And they also, just by the by, make sure kids don't go to school till they're 6 and 7. The only reason we're doing 4 and 5 is because we had the first factory acts in the world, practically. We put women into factories and we needed somewhere to put the kids. That's why 4 and 5 are particular to Britain. 82% of the countries in the world send kids to school at 6 and 7. That's the right age. We can be moving towards that too, although we need the funding of independence to make it work properly. But again, it's a reason to want independence, because we need to make that change. These guys come back pretty transformed, and you can see it in the society, because the levels of what they can do together and how easily they cooperate go all the way through to that government I spoke about earlier. Finally, I think probably, Estonia. And this is a question again about building trust, because this trust is so important. That is the Baltic chain from 1989, when there was millions of people stood side by side to express a desire for independence around the time of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And because of the trust levels that there are in all the Nordic countries, including the Estonians, who are all pretty much sort of semi-Nordic, semi-Slavic, but they have an ID card. Now, I can see a lot of, people will go, I don't think so. And in Britain, we're very much, I don't think so. And Labour has just had to withdraw its idea of an ID card because we don't trust them. And this is what happens in a country without trust. You can't modernise. And I've got to say, having watched what they do in Estonia, it's mind-blowing. You don't need other cards apart from that card. They have systems that absolutely protect your identity and your data. And for example, any of you have spent time filling in your self-assessment for your tax? Anybody do that in the room? Yeah? Right, it takes 1 minute. Because the data's already there. Who's applied for stuff here on the state where you've had to pile in the information they've already got? Well, you don't. It takes a minute. And they've already figured that just one digital application, which is being able to sign documents online, has saved them 2% of their GDP. If you don't want to do that, rock on. But what you need to be able to have a country that makes that kind of change is trust. And the Estonians have that because they walked the difficult path to independence as recently in 1991 together. And they made very bold decisions about going digital because they had nothing else going for them. One of their returning exiles came from the States and suggested that the internet was a thing to look at. Now, because all their leaders, since the communist era had been swept away, their leaders were all under 30. Their bankers were teenagers. Seriously. And given the youth of that cabinet, they were able to embrace something that I'm afraid to say our age group might not have done. They took a risk. They bought state-of-the-art computers with the little money they had, and they put them in primary schools. Not executive offices, not heat bummers. And so they grew the first generation of digital entrepreneurs. So Skype, may it rest in peace, Skype was actually the product of 3 Estonian engineers who as children were the first to get computers after Estonian independence. It's worth thinking about all these things. We need to be open to what's running when we become independent and not stick rigidly to what's IB. And that is this question of trust. When you look there, you can see the countries that trust most, then again, are blue, and there's the Finns in dark blue, they're right at the top of the heap, and there's us, yellow, not doing very well at all, and that's something we need to do. So the thing about it is, it'll be hard for you to see that. So much of Scotland is going the right way. You know, we've put the energy in when it comes to land buyouts, and that's been a really brave thing for people to do, actually, because it's done without much support. We have incredible numbers of development trusts that run assets around Scotland, and they're demonstrating to themselves and their communities that they can do that. There's hardly been a problem with one where there are problems with private companies. But the big thing, I think, that we need to think about is what community means. Here, it means volunteers. It very often means burnt-out volunteers who are struggling on, trying not to say they're burnt out because they don't want to let the side down. Everywhere else, a community means a municipality with structure, with voting, with power right down at that lowest level. Particularly Norway, look at that. That's the number of councils they have. In fact, they've got a few more now, 357, so that every community has got that practice of running itself. And we don't. Now, we do have the Development Trust movement, and it's amazing. I can't get all the names of Development Trusts. I mean, that's just A to, D. There's huge numbers of people. And I do wonder for the politicians what it takes to watch all these development trusts set up where there's not a paid director in it. And they all willingly take up that, learn things no one expected to learn, take responsibility no one should be expected to do. And look, that's just A to D of it. And yet we still wonder whether we're capable. And we won't make these structural changes. And then the final point, okay, this is the round ball. But that moment in the Euros with the umbrella man, or the brolly man as he was known, it's a lovely demonstration of something that is really unique about Scotland and in which the Nordics don't hold a candle to us, actually. And that is just that willingness to reach out to people. I mean, that's the guy who just was wandering around in the rain, put his brolly up over the wee Shelpit Manny that was shuffling along with his Zimmer, and that became an absolute icon of those tournaments. It was taken up and put on an advert on all the German underground because those guys were so impressed with just that spontaneous gesture of generosity. It happened in Kenmure Street, which was a really powerful moment for Scotland, where neighbours decided they weren't letting 2 guys get lifted by the Home Office because they were neighbours. And the guy who dived beneath the van man, what a guy. If we had a Scottish honour system, he should be given one. In fact, why haven't we got a Scottish honour system? Do it! But that film, see it when it comes out, everybody to Kenmure Street, it's a great gesture again of reaching out. We're all Jock Tamson's bairns, and in the referendum, the independence referendum, the criteria was if you were living here for 3 months, you're in. The criteria for Brexit was ethnic. It was Commonwealth, Irish, British citizens. You could have lived here your entire life from another country, you didn't get a say. So we should be proud of that because we did that without even thinking about it. We embraced, if you like, the newcomer. That's a strong, strong thing that other countries don't do. And of course, we're not doing too badly with music, are we? In cultural terms, we are so strong. And I just want to finish on this. Which this is just it looks like an average bookcase. It's actually a bookcase of a woman who asked me to go and speak in Iceland. And when I was using her office, again with the window open because it was so hot, I looked at her bookcase and it was full of Scottish literature. And when I said to her, wow, you've got a hell of a bookcase there, she said, yeah, I did my degree in Glasgow in Scottish literature. And I said, really? Okay. Okay. And I said, why did you do that? She said, why wouldn't I? You've got one of the best literatures in the world. And that's on the back of her door. So, let's do it. Thank you.
And with Jim Sillars, former MP and former deputy leader of the Scottish National Party, what do you think, Jim, about the SNP's strategy going into this May election?
They don't have a strategy. They have tactics, which is entirely different from a strategy. And the tactic is to use the term independence like a fisherman uses a lure to catch a salmon. They're using a political lure to catch as many votes as they can in the public stream in order to translate it into seats, even if it's a minority seats in terms of minority government. That's the tactic. Independence is not really on their radar.
Now, at the same time, the SNP, of course, are making more of a feature in this election. As a matter of fact, John Swinney, very unusually, was at an independence march and rally just last week. Up to then, previous leaders of the SNP have avoided independence marches. Do you think this is just because we're in a pre-election campaign?
Yes, as I said, this is a tactic. And what Johns wants to do is hold out independence so that you vote for the SNP. In order to get a requisite number of seats that makes them the largest party, but not necessarily the majority party. And they would be quite happy going into the next 5 years as a minority government, being able to say, we're a minority, we can't do this, we can't do that, and obviously they won't give us a referendum, and wicked Westminster is as wicked as ever. That advances independence not one iota.
So what in that case would you say is a true strategy for independence?
The strategy for independence is look to 2029 Westminster election, when the electoral system first past the post is in our advantage, and that between now and then we have 3 years. The first year we build a manifesto for independence, dealing with all the issues that affect our people in the Union at the present time, showing them the difference we could make with independence. That's the first year task for the movement. Then you've got 2 years to campaign and educate among the people up until 2029, with the intention during that campaign of going to 55% rock solid support for independence, and get it higher if you possibly can. Because if you go into the 2029 election at 55% and over with rock solid support, you win every seat in Scotland. And when you win every seat in Scotland, you change the power equation. That gives us the power to set the agenda, and for us then to lay down the law to Westminster about how we're going to get independence.
Now, how do you see the relationship between the broad pro-independence movement, which is not party political, and party politics? Do you think in order to force the SNP into such a strategy, do we need a strong independence movement outside of Parliament? And do you see sessions like this today as a start of getting the independence movement back together?
I think this could well prove to be a historic day. And I think the movement has to consider, and we won't be able to consider until after the May election, when we analyse the result. And the question we will have to answer internally is a very hard one, given the history of the SNP. Whether or not the SNP can now be trusted to be the single vehicle to take us to independence. And if the result in the May election is that they are not going towards independence, nor are they the only vehicle now available to us, then the movement will have to think of something else. That's a hard decision that will have to be made, but that involves statecraft. For us to begin to think much deeper, wider, and more intellectually sensible than we've done for the last 10 years. Because the history of the last 10 years under SNP leadership is 10 wasted years. We can't afford to waste the next 3.
Now, of course, as you say, we can't really guess the results of the May election, but it does look highly improbable the SNP can win 65 seats on their own because of the way the voting system counts. So why do you think SNP sticks to the policy you've got to use the SNP vote 1 and 2 also in your list vote? Why do they argue what's obviously a very difficult target to achieve?
That's because the SNP wants us to believe and wants to assert without any doubt that they are the one and only vehicle to take us to independence. And if they are arguing that, both votes, SNP, constituency and lists, and don't get to the majority, then this movement has to ask itself some hard questions. And the hardest question is, do we really believe they can do it? And if the answer is no, we don't believe they can do it, then we're going to do something different. And by the way, I'm 88, and 2029's 3 years away, so I'm only making forecasts. I'll probably not be involved in the discussions at that time. But what I'm signalling in my speech this afternoon is that's the kind of hard thinking and hard decision making we will have to do. We'll have to wake up one morning and say, do we really mean to get independence? And if we do, then we have to make decisions that are different from the ones made in the last 10 years and likely to be made in the May election.
Yeah. And we will take excerpts from your speech this afternoon as well. So, Jim Sillars, thank you for talking to the Scotland Channel.
You're more than welcome.
So before I get into, I've got 3 main things I want to say, just kind of summing up today. But before I get into that, I'd like to say a round of thank yous really to the Oran Mor staff who have been absolutely outstanding, not just today, but in the build-up to this. Both the IFS and Yes United teams and Indie Live and Scotland Channel, who are today here recording this, are 3 inspiring speakers, Lesley, Riddoch, Phil Boswell and Jim Sillars. And the biggest thank you is to you, because it's you that has made today. We've not just been speaking today, but we have been listening big time. 3 things in terms of summing up. The first one's a reflection, really, and Jim actually touched on this in his speech. Yes, and SNP are decoupling. We can see that in the figures. 30%, 50% for independence is a 20% gap. But that's before we even think about the soft no's. The 20% of soft no's who want to vote yes and want to be convinced. Nobody is talking to them. So, as a movement, we're in a different place. But there's also a compare and contrast. There's here, we've got yes in Glasgow, SNP in Edinburgh. There's been a lot of challenge and thinking today in here, and I could even hear it getting quite heated at a few tables. I'll guarantee you that's not been happening at the showpiece middle management event that's happening through in Edinburgh, right? The other thing is we've been talking about here is long-term. It's thinking about the art of statehood. In Edinburgh, it's short-term, how do I get elected? That's a big difference. So the litmus test for me at these events is I come away and I usually think, so what? Come here, we've had a good day, we've heard a lot. What's next? Well, there's already stuff starting. What we've been speaking about today is feeding directly into the Manifesto for Independence, the first 5 years of Scottish independence. And just to give some examples of what we've heard today, we heard about pumped storage in energy, right? A key part for system security. We've heard about using pension funds for investment, particularly in Scottish infrastructure and Scottish companies. And we've also heard about land tax, because what that's going to do is going to tackle the problem Lesley thought about and spoke about, which is land ownership, which actually comes down to democratic equity. And these are the things that we need to be tackling. And I would doubt any of those have come up in Edinburgh today. So what we've been talking about feeds into that, and we'll be building on that and getting everybody involved. The work's already underway to do that manifesto. The other thing is that these events that have been going on for, I think this is the 4th or 5th with IFS, it's our 4th, these are turning into a spring and autumn conference. And Neil earlier on spoke about the need for education and lifting the level of the political debate. This is a really good forum for doing that, and we can expand on that with some of what we're doing. And then the third one, which I think is essential and we'll be doing tonight, when I went to the first IFS conference in Stirling, I put my hand up and asked about the arts, because we haven't spoken to the arts in a decade. Right? And I'm the last person in the world who would be promoting this. I'm an engineer. I think in straight lines and right angles. I have no talent whatsoever. Right? But what was very clear to me is we don't win this without the artists, because we can come up with the best business plan, the best strategy, the best manifesto. But if we don't make people feel, they will not vote our way. And we need our artists. And we need the artists. And my third point, I'll keep very short because I can see William in the background and I know the game's finishing up, is optimism. This is the most exciting decade in Scottish history for 300 years. Right? We have never been closer to independence than we are now. If you had to plot the boring engineer, if you had to plot 79 result, you 2007, 2014, there is a line and there's a trajectory there, right? The numbers are in our favour. People are wanting us to make the case. It's within our grasp and we've never been closer. That is a very optimistic place to be. The last 10 years haven't worked. It's a lost decade. The hard yards haven't been done. There's been more hard yards done here in Glasgow than there will have been in Edinburgh today. It's up to us. We're the leaders. We need to be getting on and building this. So I'm going to finish with a quote from Abraham Lincoln and Jim Sillars. We must think anew and act anew. Thank you.